So we are switching our setup just a little bit. We're going to have some panel discussions, and our first panel discussion is starting, as Shane said, right now. So today, this first session is going to address the role of state associations in terms of the officiating shortage and all of that it entails. We're excited to have 4 state association staff members with us today to tell us about what they're doing in their state, some of the initiatives that they have, and really some ideas that work and that are working for them in their states. Next to me, I have Lance Taylor. He's the Executive Director of the Arkansas Activities Association. Next to him, I have to make sure I know who these people are, is Michael Book, the Assistant Commissioner of the Colorado High School Activities Association, which we can call CHASA because it's a mouthful. Next to him is Michael Kruger, the Executive Director of CHASA. And at the end, the person who's going to keep us all in line up here is Patrick Gebhardt of the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, and he's an Assistant Executive Director there. Let's welcome our panel. All right, we're going to start off with you, Mr. Taylor. Tell us about your officials recruitment and retention initiative in Arkansas and where you've involved your superintendents and officials from across the state to really address some of these issues.
All right, well, first of all, thank you for having us. We appreciate being here today with everyone, and I've already learned a lot, already taken a lot of notes, and a lot of this is what all of you are doing, I think, right now. We took a survey, our numbers started diving, and right at COVID, and we knew why. We knew COVID was a big reason, but we took a survey anyway. We wanted to know, and it was funny that COVID wasn't at the top, okay? We had COVID, family, relocation, change of jobs, just like all y'all do every day. But the number one reason, just like you've seen today, was abuse from fans. And number 2 was abuse from coaches. So our numbers dropped drastically, and we were worried that we were going to have to start putting games on different days just so we could play varsity football. Maybe some Thursdays, some Fridays, some Saturday. We looked at all that, never got there, but we were worried about it. So what Don Rodell, who's over officials in our state, did, he started going out to the universities. And it was very productive for us because he hit PE classes, coaches classes, and intramural officials, what you've heard today. And we started signing those people up early and getting them on board because I think somebody said it today, we could pay them more than they were getting for intramurals. So we started trying to get those people in and started building our numbers back up. We did everything with social media that you could do. I mean, we posted stuff, we recruited, we used the NFHS and all their PSAs. We started giving breaks back to broadcasting crews that were doing our games if they would run the NFHS stuff and our PSAs on their, while they were doing our games. And they agreed to do that, so we cut them some break by doing that. We even emailed our retired officials and asked them to come back and help us because we still had all that in our database to come back and help us and get us through that. We were very lucky in Arkansas. We never shut down except the spring right when COVID hit. And then our governor, who was a big guy in athletics, and more importantly, he had 2 grandsons who were in high school and he wanted to go to games. So he allowed us to keep playing after that spring. We missed baseball and softball and soccer besides in track. Besides that, we started rolling again June 1st. We started full practice. Everything was allowed. And we got very lucky and had a good governor that did that. But then we went back and looked at our survey and think, you know what? We didn't address the two problems we had, fans and coaches. And we thought, you know what, we can do this. And what we did is we have 15 educational co-ops in our state, and all the schools belong to those co-ops. And all the superintendents meet there, principals meet there, teachers meet there, and we go there and speak all the time, all year long when they need us. And we thought, we're going to try to pick the best superintendent, the best leader, the one they all look up at every co-op in our state, and the best communicator. And we put those 15 people on our panel. And then we went back to those same areas and picked 15 officials. and we made sure there were maybe volleyball, track, basketball, baseball, whatever. We picked them all, gender. We made sure we checked all the boxes, and we brought those folks in, and we made sure, and Dana came and presented for us and helped us, but they had to sit next to each other. We didn't put superintendents on one side, officials. We wanted to humanize both groups and make sure they had to sit there and eat with one another and communicate with one another. And it went really well. Dana had the first hour, and then we went through a lot of stuff with them, and it was very, very productive. And 12 out of those 15 went back and within a week had new guidelines for their games that their administrators were supposed to follow. So anyway, that's kind of what we did.
Thank you, Lance, and it was a great experience in Arkansas. It was just great to see the superintendents and officials sitting with each other and kind of getting to know each other outside of what they see when the stripes go on. So I think that was really important. And now I feel like we have radio guests here because we have Mike and Mike from from Colorado who are joining us today. So CHSAA launched its own officials recruitment campaign in November. If you could tell everybody a little bit about what that campaign is and how you really went about developing it.
Sure. Thanks for having us again. This is pretty cool to talk officiating for a few days. So, first, I'm the rookie in Colorado. I started in July, and so I don't know anything. And I came from being a principal, and so that tells you again I don't know anything. And I officiate basketball, so I don't know anything. So anyways.
Well, I made a really good choice.
And so Mike has all the answers. So when I started with the officiating, overseeing officials in Colorado, we knew that obviously, like everybody else, had an issue with losing officials and not being able to cover games. Unlike Lance in Arkansas, we lived the fall having to move hundreds of games off Friday night because we didn't have officials to cover. So we were playing on Thursday nights, Saturday afternoons, and then on Friday nights when possible. And that was losing money to the schools because of their gate, and officials are working so many more nights a week during football and that kind of thing. So we kind of came together, and me being the rookie, so had the opportunity to do some TV interviews and stuff about officials in Colorado. And through that, kind of the same thing kind of kept coming back to us, and that was, one, people don't know how to become an official. They know that it's out there, but they don't know the steps to do that. And two, we needed a pipeline of new officials, whether that's young or whatever age they are, just new officials coming in to replace the ones that are getting out of it. And we didn't have that. And so we got together and talked about two things. This initiative, we call it You Look Good in Stripes. It's for new officials. We understood that the barriers that new officials encounter when trying to become a new officials are a lot of money. So dues, we have two sets of dues in Colorado, the state dues and then the association dues, and then also uniform and gear. And so Mr. Kruger went to the foundation, our CHSAA Foundation, and asked for some money from the foundation. The foundation gave us some money to get started to cover all dues and uniforms for all new officials. So with that, as of this morning, our goal for the year was 500 officials. If we could get 500 new officials, we thought we were going to be doing pretty well. And this morning we're at 609 since November. So, and that covers all sports, all parts of the state, and so we're feeling really pretty good about that. And so that's kind of been a hit. Obviously, 609 officials have not completed the registration, gotten on the field or the court, and so that's our next step, is to make sure that we can get all those people on there. But it has been a really positive experience so far. Okay.
I make him call me Mr. when we're in public, so I want to make sure that I get that clear. It has been. I'm a rookie as well, but not a rookie to the space. And taking that and having an official on staff and someone that is in officiating, and can understand it from a trenches point of view. We identified 3 things, and they've all been shared today. Fan behavior is an issue. Another issue is just making sure our pool, pay was one, and then the third one was just increasing that pool of officials. How do we recruit new officials that haven't been involved? So this isn't, I'm not going to overcomplicate this. The Become an Official program, it's an off-take of the same thing that we're doing, and so we looked at it from Colorado's perspective. And the You Look Good in Stripes piece came from, actually from Mike, because he would always, that's kind of his little moniker, he'd say to all his officials, hey, you look good in stripes. So we got sitting around and looking at the research, looking at the data, and we just tried to identify what are some of the biggest barriers to someone getting involved, and made it that simple. And said, okay, so let's do this. One, and if you take one thing from this, regardless of your programs, this is what we have found, and I think it's been proven out with over 600 new officials in less than 2.5, 3 months, is have an easy call to action. We need to make it simple, because if you have people sitting there that might want to get involved, or you say, hey, become an official, how did they do that? And what we discovered is it's not the easiest thing in the world. You go, okay, so I want to become a volleyball official. Who do I contact? Who do I, so as the NFHS does, and I think they set a great standard here, is reach out to us, we'll put the people in touch with you. We kind of followed that same model. We created a single link that you could get on your phone, you could do on your computer, but it was just hashtag You Look Good in Stripes. And that link, you just click on it, it takes you to a single web page. You don't have to navigate through a bunch of stuff on find officials and all that. It takes you immediately to a single web page where you get your name, contact information, email, phone number, and then just a box with check boxes. What sports are you interested in? That's all they have to do. We take it from there. We contact the assigners for those sports, and they personally reach out and they make that one-to-one personal contact with that prospective official. That has been, I think, one of the biggest things that we've done with this whole thing. Not super complicated. Make sure the call to action is easy. The other thing we did, obviously, was try to reduce cost. Now, I know we're targeting a lot of younger officials, but this is really for anyone. Again, how can we make it easy? We did get some funding. We're looking at ways to continue to build that funding, and it scared us to death, to be honest with you, because the funding we got, we thought, okay, if we get a couple hundred officials, I think we can cover it. And then when we hit 500 a couple weeks ago, we had those nervous moments, but we're looking at ways to fund that. But what we did was we also went to the officials organizations in the state, every single sport, and said, what are the costs for someone to get involved? And try to reduce those costs, either eliminate them or reduce them for a first-time official. And the message we gave to the Officials Association was, if we can get them in, then next year they become an official for years. Now you're getting the membership fees and all the registration stuff. Get them in the door first, because right now they're not in the door. And they worked with us. I would say over 90% of the officials organizations either reduced completely their registration fee, their testing fee, whatever it is, we covered from the state. We covered the background check fee. So I know that can be a big hurdle for some, and there's not people knocking down our doors to give us money for stuff. But I can tell you there's folks out there that they understand the crisis we're in, and they'll help. But if you can work with your officials organizations to do that, that is a huge barrier. We also have an equipment grant part of this, which we expect with baseball coming might be more than we, because that equipment's expensive through basketball and swimming and wrestling. You're talking about whistles or maybe a striped shirt. We also reached out to some of our corporate sponsors, some of our sporting goods sponsors, to see if they'd work with us. And then last thing, and I think this is a really important piece to this, and I think this is another takeaway to put in your toolkit. We live in a metro area. We have a strong pro sports community. I know from living here in Indianapolis, we have a strong college community as well, but we reached out to them and we didn't ask them for money, we asked them for support. And we said, we need to get this out, and can you help us push this, Denver Broncos? Can you help us share our need here and just share the hashtag on your social? Just do this. Denver Nuggets, can you help us? Colorado Avalanche, can you help us? Colorado Rockies, Colorado Rapids for soccer. And we've reached out, and they've been hugely supportive. In fact, the Broncos went as far as to take their mascot and put him in a referee's striped shirt, and they did a photo shoot of "You Look Good in Stripes." So we have Miles for the Broncos out there, sending this message. So getting the support of your pro sports teams or the influencers in your community, which I think is also, last thing, sorry, soapbox issue. We haven't talked about it a lot today yet, but I think the influence of our pro sports teams is paramount to addressing this situation, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I think we give them a free pass, and I've talked to them about it as well and said that same thing. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, so I don't think, but I was pretty straightforward, and I said, it is hard to sit as a season ticket holder for the Colorado Avalanche in an arena, knowing the crisis I face every day when I show up at my office and sit next to people that start a chant in a stadium that say, "Ref, you suck." And I see young kids sitting there. This is what we're modeling with some of the most influential teams in our community. So we can no longer give those professional teams a free pass. We need their involvement. We need them to help us. And for us, reaching out to them and saying, here's an initiative, you could help support us. It gives us open that door to say, now how can we help you model gamesmanship and sportsmanship and appropriate behavior? I know it's tough. It's tough at the high school level. You have at least professional athletes that can send a message with influence behind us, help us out. And that's been a huge part of that, is to get their support.
Thank you, gentlemen. Pat, the PIAA has started looking to its high school students to really help solve the recruitment crisis. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done with your junior officials program?
Yeah, thank you. Really, the junior officials program started just a few months ago, but I think in its infancy probably started 2 years ago when we saw the number of our officials dropping. And that was primarily attributed to COVID, number one, but also clearances are required in Pennsylvania, and that was the 5-year anniversary of clearances. Those two items met together and caused us to lose some officials. So we knew we had that issue. We also knew we had bad acting folks that we wanted to address. So when I brought some of the conduct before our board of directors and actually gave them the verbiage, the language that the official used in that disqualification, I think they were appalled. At that point, they decided to do something which I thought was outstanding in their own right, was they extended the jurisdiction of all officials in Pennsylvania. And once they come on the campus of the facility where they're working, they have jurisdiction until they leave. I'll just cite the basketball rule, which everyone knows. You only have jurisdiction when you're in the visual confines of the court. But when that basketball official would go to the locker room, and next thing you know, he has a coach outside beating down the door, they felt helpless. They couldn't do anything. And that was the example I used before our board, which they decided to use as the impetus to extend the jurisdiction. So with that, the whole program of revamping our recruiting and retention policies within the office was changed at that point. And the junior officials program just became one of those spokes. If anyone knows Dr. Lombardi, my executive director, he can be very influential, and he was with our board of directors when he asked for additional monies to support the recruiting and retention program. So with those additional monies, we've bought a recruiting tent that we have at our championships. We offer that to our schools also if they want to have this tent. It's a huge 10x10 tent that we use to recruit. We bought business cards, we bought pamphlets, all those type of things we hand out at our championships, and we've seen great value in that. In addition, we also started the Officials Appreciation Week 2 years ago, which has really grown every year that we've had it. And the final point was the junior officials program, which Dana asked me to talk about. There's not a lot to talk about with regard to the junior officials program. The only thing we did was we waived the entry fees for those officials to take the test. And we also provided opportunities for reduced uniform costs, but they still have to attend meetings, pass the test. And one of the negatives that we're asking for legislative intervention is if they could be waived for their clearances. So it only applies to 16 and 17-year-olds in Pennsylvania, and they can only officiate 9th grade and below. So 7th, 8th, and 9th grade contest, 16 and 17-year-olds can officiate. It's really nothing earth-shattering. Over the last 3 months, we've had 150 individuals sign up for that. I know we'll talk about some of the roadblocks as we head down the road, but I think in addition to the program just being valuable and garnering more officials, it's raised our notoriety regarding the subject and the need for officials. And that's probably the biggest thing with the recruiting tent. It's so big and so bright, the colors, that people are like, what is that? Oh, it's a officials recruiting tent. And then they realize, okay, there is a problem. And I think that has really helped us raise the notoriety in Pennsylvania. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you so much. That's great information, all of you. So the next several questions are for the whole panel. Since you began your initiative, what do you consider some of the successes of your program? And whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I think for us, we are seeing an increase in the desire to become an official. Obviously, we have some roadblocks still to address, as everybody else does, but kind of the buzz around the state is that officials are being supported, obviously, with our programs. We just increased our officials' pay by 33 to 50% in the next 3 years. And so they're kind of seeing that, one, it's a problem, they want to help, and we're there to support them and doing everything that we can. So I think that has been probably the most beneficial.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point about the show of support, because so many times officials feel like they don't have that voice, they don't have somebody in a state office or an NGB or whatever the case may be who really has their back. So when you do the things, even if the pay increase doesn't get passed, the fact that they know they have people going to bat for them is a huge show of just, okay, they're trying to work for us, and that's huge. I think we kind of underestimate the importance of that.
Yeah, I would just mention that I think our officials have become humanized, and I think we've talked about that in here over the last few hours, but our Twitter page blows up during Officials Appreciation Week because those officials are humanized. We have the pictures taken with the cheerleaders, with the basketball team, the wrestling team, whatever it might be, and it does show them in a different environment than just being on the competition circuit. So that's been a benefit to us.
I think in Arkansas, what we've seen from the beginning after we had our meeting, probably November, somewhere, yep. Our technicals injections were higher before our meeting than they are now. And usually it's just the opposite. As you go along, officials probably get tired of being chewed on, coaches start feeling that pressure of winning, right in the middle of the conference season, we call it the dog days, and they have to grind through them, everybody. And our number of technicals injections are going down. And I think that's from our superintendents going back, because what we asked them to do was coach your coaches. Because if you'll get the coaches off the officials, guess who else will get off the officials? Your fans. Because as soon as one of them sit there, they don't even have to say anything, they just raise their hands up. And then those fans think that's their chance to get after the officials. So what we've seen by coaching the superintendents to coach their coaches, our ejections are going down, and so are our technicals. And it's really just the opposite of what happens usually during the year. So that's a bit great.
Mr. Kruger, do you have anything else?
I would say one of the successes we've seen, and I think Mike mentioned the pay, maybe we can talk about that here in a little bit, but this is obviously, again, this consortium is a good model for this, but it's such a multifaceted problem. We're talking about one initiative to bring officials in, but it's multifaceted. And the most important thing I think we can do relative to that, one of the successes we've seen, and I think it's exhibited by the success we're seeing, is the voices, bringing voices to the table. We talk about officials' pay. We can't just talk to officials, and then we can't, on the flip side, just talk to schools. We've got to bring everybody to the table, the stakeholders that have that. And I think the success we had a lot of success this week in Colorado. Our legislative council meeting was Tuesday. And I think it's because of bringing the voices to the table, people felt heard. Even if it didn't mean exactly where they wanted to go, they knew they were part of the discussion, and that is huge when we're trying to tackle such a big, multifaceted issue. The other thing it does for us that I'm excited about is as we continue to move forward, this is first steps, as we continue this, you set that standard of, hey, voices are going to be involved, and we're sharing and united around this continuing issue, and we're going to solve it together. We don't need you know, you're gonna have some stuff and you're gonna have some stuff, but everybody brings those ideas to the table, and now there's this symbiotic energy that everybody felt part of the steps that we're taking.
And of course, we talk about the successes, so as people in this room are trying to build programs and initiatives to address the issue, we have to talk about those barriers. So what, if any, were some of the barriers that you encountered when you were implementing your program, and how did you overcome those barriers?
Okay, again, working from the top down with superintendents, what we found out, when we went out to those 15 co-ops and we started trying to look who would be the best communicator, who was the best leader, and the more experienced superintendents, what we found out, those were ex-coaches, okay? And so what the barrier we have found out, when I first started 20 plus years ago in the state office, probably 85 to 90% of all superintendents and principals were ex-coaches. And today that's probably 25%. And I think what we have, our barriers, we're going to have to start going back out to those co-ops and principals meetings and train those people how to deal with their coaches and their officials and their fans. I don't think they know how. Before, when 90% of them were ex-coaches, they knew how to treat officials. And they already had a relationship with those people. And now they don't. And that's one thing that we found out is our barrier. They're not around them ever, except at that contest, and they just lean against the wall. They're there. But again, I think they think the officials should take care of that problem instead of them, because it puts them in a bad situation with their own fans. And it puts pressure on them. And usually people that attend their games are proactive people in their school. They're supporters of their school when they ask for a millage and everything else. So I think we're going to have to go back out and train them. That's something that we have to overcome, to go back out and train them.
I would say let's just focus on two. One is we've talked about the need for improving the behavior issues from fans and parents and such. And the second would be officials' pay. Let's talk about really quickly, the sportsmanship, the bad behavior, bench bad behavior program. The biggest barrier to that, I think, to me, as a state executive, and then, but also coming from the world of being an athletic director and school administrator, is consistency in the membership. It is so hard for some parts of, I'll just break it down into a school district, when one school is really helping to support these initiatives, but you can go right down the road and you're not getting that same support, and fans are going to this other school, and all of a sudden you're that athletic director going, well, we don't let them do that at our gym, but when you go down, you know, we've got to unify around that same initiative. It has to be as important to everybody. And I love the comment about zero tolerance today. That resonated with me because we do say it. We have zero tolerance, but I am so excited to go back to my state and our state and say, what does that mean to us? What does that mean? What does that look like? And can we all share in the responsibility to make sure that that's the expectation we have, not just for an individual school, but for our entire state. This is what zero tolerance means, and we're part of this membership, and we'll buy into that. So that barrier is a big one. We've got to attack that together. And then as far as pay goes, again, for being a school administrator, being an athletic director, and I don't know what as a state executive or what your background is, but I would tell you that we've got to be know what we're dealing with when we go to schools, and say an awareness of that schools for the longest time, I know from Colorado, we've known that officials' pay has been an issue for a long time. And this is just speaking from Colorado's perspective, if it resonates with you. We've known for a long time that we've got to increase pay. And somebody said it earlier, the $1, $2 increase, it's tough. It's not where we need it to be as a state. But we also, every time we'd approach schools, they'd say, you know, school budgets, especially athletic budgets, they're not flush. The coffers aren't flush. So when you talk about adding budget concerns and budget pressures to an already pressured budget, it's hard to say, well, let's raise official fees. We went to the schools and said, and we brought data. I guess that's my takeaway here is we brought them data and showed what officials are paid nationally. What are they paid like in Section 6 where we're located? Where are we currently at? Where do we need to be? and said to schools, our school membership said this was a priority to them, so we came back to them with information on an informed decision that said, we aren't just going to throw darts at this and say, here's what it sounds good to pay an official, here's what they're being paid nationally. Now, we can't compete in Colorado with what lacrosse officials are getting paid on the East Coast, but across the board, which is a lot, by the way, but we can compete. And schools, we need you to step up. We need you to understand that this needs to be done. And we know that it has to have an immediate impact. The thing as a former AD and school administrator, I know is that we need time to plan that. So we, again, brought people to the table, school administrators, officials, and we talked through this and showed them the data. What we passed on Tuesday is by the end of the third year, it'll be between right around approximately a 48% increase to officials' pay in Colorado across the board. We also kind of put all the officials, we stopped really looking at officials in the sport that they officiate, and this could just be us, but why were we paying a wrestling official more than we're paying a volleyball official? And the argument for so long has been that the wrestling official just works harder because they're moving around the mat or they're running up and down the court. And I had a fundamental issue with that because we're looking at the time that this person's investing. They're trained just as well. They have the same background, in training. So we made that across the board more equitable across all sports. And we simplified the process. But at the end of the day, what we did for schools to get them to move and understand is we made it gradual. We said in year one, it'll be between 30 and 35% increase in the sport fees. Year two, we'll add a little bit more, and by year three, we'll add, and here's what will be at the end of year three. What that allowed schools to do is go back and say, how can we fund this by year three? What do we need to do? Do we need to raise activity fees? Do we need to raise ticket prices? We can't just go to them and say, here's what we need, and hope that their budgets can handle it. Because if we did that, they're going to cut programs to pay for officials and other programs, and that's not what we're trying to do. So we had to work together, and again, bringing those voices to the table, we were able to accomplish that, and it was a big day for us, Tuesday. The thing that I'll end with, and I'm most excited to tell you, is this massive 48% increase in officials' pay, which again, we weren't at the top already, so but we're now competitive, and not just competitive, we're a leader in officials' pay because our schools made the commitment. But that passed with 97% approval from our school membership. It can be done if we get together and sit at a table and say, we know it's a priority, how's it affecting us now? Where do we need to be? And it got done. 97% of the school membership in Colorado approved a 48% increase to officials' pay by the end in 3 years from now. So
That's pretty impressive. Just three quick items regarding the junior officials program and the roadblocks. The first would be our schools are reluctant to hire someone of that maturity, of that age, 16 and 17-year-olds. So we find schools, while they understand there's an issue, they're reluctant to hire a 16 or 17-year-old to do a 7th grade basketball game. The second part on that with regard to the schools is there's also received some pushback on those officials that they do hire, paying them the full fee. They want to pay them a partial fee for doing the same work that the more senior official would have on that contest. The third and maybe the most important roadblock that we run into is those 16 and 17-year-olds that want to be a junior official are probably participating in that sport at that time. So if we have a wrestler wants to be a wrestling official, he probably has a match that night because in Pennsylvania it's junior high, JV, varsity all the same night. So our varsity wrestler is not going to be able to officiate a junior high match on the same day he has a match, he or she has a match. So those are just three quick roadblocks that we've run into. I think through the program being around for a couple years, the first two we'll probably be able to overcome. The third might be more difficult, so we'll keep at it.
And I think those of us that have been in the state associations, as Mr. Kruger was talking, all I was thinking is, first of all, the pay increase is impressive, but the more impressive part is you got 97% of the schools to agree on something, which is just incredible in and of itself. So I think that was the more impressive part. But we've talked a lot about pay, and when I was still at the NMAA, I had a district athletic director who was talking to me about how everything else is a discussion in budget and it's a cost of doing business. But for years and years, the officials' fees were never in that conversation. So it was, we know fuel's more expensive, we know that players' uniforms are more expensive, we have to pay more for the kids to have meals, lodging, all of those things, but the officials' fees remain static. So a lot of states are kind of playing catch up right now because that hasn't been discussed for years and years and years. So the fact that you gave that increase, you have a little bit of lag, plus now you're looking into the future, which is awesome. So for all of you again, what are the next steps in your initiative?
Well, for us, for the Yellow Good Stripes, it's to find a way to continue to fund that, to continue to get new officials. Along with looking at now new pipelines of youth officials. There's different organizations. We have one called Gold Crown. It's a basketball organization. And they have 480 officials, you know, from high school age and on up. We have to get into that pipeline and figure out with all the sports, how can we then get those as a training ground, if we can get them at a young age and work together with that organization to figure out, okay, how can we work together to train them so when they get to the 18 or more, they can then work high school games. So I think that's part of it. But then the thing that kind of keeps resonating with me is the thought process or the quote of, we've always done this in the past, or this is how we did it in the past. And we're in the place that we are because that's the thought process. And so as we move forward, schools have obviously with our vote at Legislative Council have made a decision to not think about how they've done it in the past. Officials on the other end also need to think the same way, that we can't continue just to accept games because they're all going to be out there. Now we hopefully are going to have some competition with new officials coming in to say now we've got to get better as officials as a whole. And not be stagnant in, I'm going to get my 40 games and not have to do anything in the off season or during the season. So to me, it's that kind of mindset shift of everybody's on the same page, but we all have to get better.
Okay, one thing, we're fixing to meet again with this, our same group back in March. We've already got it set up, and we're going to bring them all back in. But we've already started talking, emailing with our group, and that's kind of the communication between the officials and administrators. We're all in the same email, and so what they put, everybody gets to see. That's very important, I think. And again, just like everything we do, communication is so big. But getting those two groups on the same email and talking about problems has been very beneficial to us in our state. They've suggested that any new principal has a mandatory meeting with us, so we're going to start that this summer, that we're going to try to train administrators of how to be proactive and take care of the problems. Officials' jobs between the lines, we all know that. Unfortunately, people outside the lines don't understand that. So we need our people to be more proactive, and I've had to do this as a principal when I had that role a long time ago. You know, when somebody's out of hand, the only thing you have to do is walk up there. It's kind of how you treat the people that you go up to. You don't even have to say anything. If you just go up there and stand for a few minutes, that parent understands why you're there if you're the principal of the school or superintendent. They'll understand real quick, and they'll be quiet. And the only thing I used to say, you okay now? I'm okay. And so again, you got to go up there with the right attitude, but guess what? Everybody else in that arena is seeing you walk up there too. And so that stops other problems for you. So again, we're going to have those meetings this summer with new principals. And then in the fall, we go out and we require every superintendent principal to be at our meetings. And we have 9 different meetings across the state geographically. And for 1 year, we're not going to talk about rules. We're going to talk about this. And we're going to talk about how to treat officials as visitors coming into your building, just like schools from other districts coming into your building. You treat them right. So we think that will help us tremendously as we go out.
Yeah, I would add, and I think for us, we have a pretty high turnover in the athletic director world. I know in Colorado for sure, and I think we had record attendance at the NIAAA conference in December, and I remember one of the numbers we threw out was the number of new athletic directors, so nothing new there, but I think one of the things we have to do is not assume that athletic directors, we addressed earlier hospitality. And I think that's a huge issue. I know in Colorado, when we talk to our officials, that is one of the biggest issues that they tell us is just how they're treated when they come to a school. And that is such low-hanging fruit. It is such low-hanging fruit, what we're talking about doing here, but it's so important. So you identify those things that can have, even with the littlest effort, can have the greatest impact. And what all it is an educational effort. So I worry and want to address as we go into the next year, obviously we're excited about some of the success, but this is first steps. We can't say, okay, great, well, we got her done, boom, you know. Biggest question, we're excited, I was thinking this morning sitting at the table, we have all these new officials coming in, again, talking about retention. The best ways we can do that is to work with our schools and make sure they understand how important hospitality is. And these new athletic directors that are coming in, it's you don't know what you don't know. We can't hold them accountable. They're just not, they're thinking in a billion different directions and drinking from a fire hose to begin with. And if we can offer them a little bit of assistance and say, hey, when the officials get there, shake their hand, welcome them, take them to a good sized space or a room where it's at least where they can comfortably change and get ready for the game in a place they can meet, and then make sure after the game you take care of them, get them to their cars. That does not cost you any money. That doesn't cost you, it costs you a little bit of time, but it also reflects well on your school. And give that opportunity to those new athletic directors to learn that early and make it an expectation. That's just the way we do things. We take care of our officials at our schools. And that, I think that is one of the biggest things we can, and it's not take a lot of effort, so.
Yeah, I agree with what Mike just said. I think we've sort of turned the corner in Pennsylvania where over the last year or so, we've beaten the ADs over the head about being inactive and not being proactive and not taking care of business. And it seems that that maybe has started to change since September. We're up to like 500 officials in Pennsylvania. So for some reason, it's working. And I think it's because we've all decided to pull in the same direction. And those confrontations have, those walls have gone down somewhat. And I think if we just continue on, we'll hopefully next year at the same time, we'll be up even more. So thank you, David.
Thank you. And one final question for all of you. What words of advice or wisdom would you have for state associations or any other governing bodies in the room who are really starting a widespread officials recruitment and retention program?
Understand, we kind of mentioned it, understand that it's a multifaceted problem. There's not easy solutions, but those solutions come best from having a number of voices at the table. Reach out and make sure officials are involved. They're part of the discussion. Schools at the same time, your stakeholder community. I think another thing too is there's a lot of things happening. I know I was really cognizant of this when we came in this year is you can't do everything at once, but the things you identify that you want to do them really well. You know, support the schools in their efforts, unify around what we're going to do and attack those things really well as opposed to trying to do everything that's, you know, we talk about and not really hitting the mark and with some of those. I think that's been important for us because of the severity of this issue. Pick a couple of things and really focus your efforts. You can do others, but for us it was to really make sure we kind of laser focused in on where we wanted to invest our time and energy, and that seemed to be really helpful to us.
I would suggest again, get your administrators involved, superintendents and principals. That's top down. It's working so far in Arkansas, and hopefully it will continue to do that. I want to talk about something that Michael just said about hospitality. When we brought those 15 officials in, those 15 superintendents, the last thing that we got to is at the very end, and one of my officials said, you know, we get paid, we love this, we know it's a job, but if you just tell us thank you. And that's so easy for an administrator to say, thank you for working tonight, we appreciate you. That's all they wanted. That's it. They just wanted somebody to appreciate them coming, leaving work early, missing supper. Hopefully you treat them right when they get there with hospitality, but then just thank them. And that's so easy to do. That's what our officials were looking for. Just thank them for coming and working your games. That's something that we can pass along. I think our administrators are starting to do that now.
Yeah, I think from a state office perspective, a lot of what Lance just said, we should be doing more of it. I think we recognize that with the appreciation weeks that we started last year. But in Pennsylvania, when you would register to become an official, we wouldn't even talk to you until you hit the 30-year mark, and then we'd invite you to a banquet and give you a gold watch. Well, we've decided in 5-year increments to, hey, say, thanks for what you've been doing. It's crazy that we've waited 30 years and finally say thank you. So we try to do that a little bit more often, just following up what Ryan said.
And I think it keeps going back to me that if we keep doing the same thing that we have done, then we're not going to make a whole lot of difference. And as an AD, I know, and I'm sure we all were in the same boat, we used to do the greeting, the escorting, the coaching, the everything that has to do with the game night, right? And so I've had conversations with our student leadership assistant commissioner, Rashawn, and what about the student leadership group taking over the hospitality part of it so that you as the administrator can say thank you and can greet and that kind of thing, but then give a little bit of shout out to your student leadership groups or any kind of group, and then kind of glorify those groups a little bit so they get a little bit of publicity and that kind of thing. But it takes it out of the AD's hands so that you can do. I think we get so we run around so much with so many tasks on a game night that sometimes we forget to do those things. So do something different.
And I think you hit the nail on the head just to kind of close. It is finding those outside the box solutions, because the way we were doing things obviously wasn't working. So we do have a lot of states that are starting to use like a student ambassador, where there's students who are greeting the officials when they show up and taking them to their locker rooms and walking them out onto the quarter field. And it does a couple of things. So first of all, it gets those student groups involved. If it's your student council or your cheerleaders or your glee club or whatever you've got. I just dated myself by saying glee club, but I shouldn't have said that. I should have picked something else, but honor society, I don't know. So any of those student groups that you want to get involved, if you have them, not only does it get them involved in the athletic world, it also helps the athletes appreciate what those other student groups are doing. So now we've got that level of relationship. But it also helps with the humanization of officials again, because you've got a 16-year-old who's now walking them out onto the quarter field, and maybe that's going to help people go, you know what, these officials are okay. Like, they're here for those kids, and they're here to do that. But having students get involved in that way, the small things like Lance talked about with saying thank you. I don't know how many times I would have an official call and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I got a bottle of water last night, and I'm like, okay, should that be a big deal? No, it shouldn't, because that should be happening all the time. So I think that low-hanging fruit, those are the easy things. Many of the state associations in here have allowed our office to send thank yous to their officials or recognition of 20 years of service. And when I get emails back from those officials saying, hey, I've done this for 30 years and I've never been thanked, or I've never heard from the national office, or I've never heard from someone, it means a lot. Very low investment for time, but it goes a really long way with officials. So just think of those easy things that cost you $0 and not a whole lot of time, and realize what an impact those kinds of efforts have on officials. All right, we were efficient. We finished 10 minutes early. So that means everybody has a few more minutes to get to your breakout rooms. So we are going into work sessions right now. Oh, yes. Mr. Axe, Dr. Axe.
So my question is the private sector. So we have organizations that would like to provide resources for many of these projects. But unless you're a 501c3 or have another way of giving that, foundations cannot contribute on your behalf. So I just want people to think about that. It's often been state-run, but the private sector can't get involved unless you have a status that allows us.
Call Arkansas.
We're a 501c3, we'll take your money.
Okay, so that's very nice to know, because we don't have that luxury in Delaware. So if we're the only problem, that's great. But that is one of those things but you may want to look to foundations for resources as well. You talked about your manufacturing companies that you use their different things, but there are the private sector people that find perhaps your first year people, where we're looking to engage them. That may be where a resource can be gotten.
I do like how everybody on the stage was like, I'm a 501c3, so. Write your checks, right? You can write those out to who? Yes, sir.
For Colorado, you were talking about the pay. Are you trying to institute like a minimum standard or a minimum recommendation? How
Really?
are you talking to people? I'm a track official. I can go to a high school meet in Milwaukee, Wisconsin and get $100. I can go to another meet and get $200.
Yeah, we talked about that, and to be honest, this is respective to other states have different procedures and policies. When we looked around the country, in fact, in Section 6, I can tell you Nebraska, or neighboring states for us in that region, Nebraska and Kansas are that way. They can negotiate different amounts. For us, it's equitable across the state. So if you go to this place and that place, now I'm only speaking for Colorado. For me, I saw that as a challenge because our state is so diverse in terms of rural and metro and mountain. And to be honest with you, I think it would be hard for rural communities to compete to get officials to come out where it's already difficult. But if they can stay next to their house and get more money, that actually exacerbates the issue for us. So for us, it doesn't matter where you go, what you do in the state. If you're a track official, you're going to be paid this amount for a meet, and you're going to be paid. One of the things we did do that I'm really proud of personally for what the group did was kind of got away from the how many teams are at this meet, how many teams, how many this and that I know we do a lot with track and cross country, and we started to look at, again, valuing the official's time. How long is the official there? If there's 8 teams, 6 teams, 7 teams, if they're there for 4 hours, we're going to pay this amount, and then for every hour once above that, we're going to pay you an hourly rate. So it really values your time that you're spending there, because again, I think we've historically looked at sports so differently. Our officials are trained, they're knowledgeable in the sport, they all put time in. We just personally felt like we didn't feel it was equitable to say that a basketball official works harder than a baseball official or a softball umpire. So that's the way we looked at it, and tried to make it a little more equitable across the board. I'll give you an example. For volleyball, the increase for their pay was over 60%, because we were not paying volleyball officials, because the stereotype was that volleyball officials stand on the stand and one stands at the net, so they're not working as hard. We just fundamentally disagree with that. They're trained just as much as a football official is. And no other officials group had a single issue with that, by the way.
And I think not only trained similar to the other sports, but as equally important to their sport as the other officials to the other sport. And I felt like the structure that we had before did not show that.
And I appreciate that. So Julie Cochran in our office, she's in charge of track and field, and we've talked quite a bit about some of the sports that are, you're spending a weekend at a track meet. So you have a basketball game and those officials are getting $80 for a 2-hour time commitment, 2.5 hours, whatever. But then you have a track official who's spending 16 hours over 2 days and they're getting paid less than basketball. So we've been talking to the track community quite a bit about that issue and really looking at ways to examine that. And we obviously, from the federation standpoint, we can't mandate fees. We can definitely give information to state associations requesting it, which we try to do. But I think that the approach that CHASA took is a good one, because they're looking at things in terms of all sports. You're looking at it holistically instead of going, well, football officials have always been paid more. Well, basketball officials have what? Well, why? So it's again, the justification of it's always been that way is no longer a good, I don't know if it was ever a good justification, but it certainly isn't now. So I was really glad to hear that conversation. Does anybody have any other questions since we've got a couple minutes? Yes, Zach.
So we've heard last night, we've heard today, breaking down and removing barriers, and maybe for the panel, maybe for the group, and maybe this is a working group question. We've heard reducing or eliminating fees for new officials. We've heard helping them with equipment. What about for the rest of our group? Are there ideas out there of other barriers that you're talking about removing to help make it attractive? The college people are using people who are young still and advancing faster. Are there advancement requirements people are revisiting? What are some thoughts you have about other things that maybe make it difficult for our officials.
I don't want to speak for the panel, but based upon what we heard at the last consortium, a lot of the barriers that the existing officials are looking at as far as how to keep them in really have to do with looking at things from an internal standpoint with regard to the people who are assigning games, what your bylaws look like. Are you making things more restrictive than they should be? Do you have assigners who have done it for 25 years and have stagnated in their roles? So it's really those have become barriers for existing officials, is how things have always been done. Again, it just keeps going back to that. But I think that what we heard loud and clear at the consortium was there really needs to be kind of an audit of the people that are in those leadership positions to make sure that they're not assigning the guy that they drink beer with every Friday night. How are we looking at games? How are we allowing officials to advance? Is that process transparent? Because what's getting assigners and state associations in trouble is having a super secret, it's like the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain somewhere, and that's the person that's giving out the assignments. How do you communicate to the officials how that process works? How do you advance from level to level? If they don't know, you're just gonna have a whole bunch of frustrated people, especially when they see somebody who can't keep up with the game, who is causing issues because of how they communicate with coaches. So those are the things that state associations, governing bodies, whomever really need to look at, are those internal issues. Yes, Mary, I think I saw your hand up.
My presentation was primarily about recruiting, but the whole retention piece is enormous, and we figure out it's all about the assigning. You know, it's about how they're getting games, the transparency involved. So what the strategic plan for Division III is calling for is compiling of best practices for assigners and coordinators, and how we make them accountable. That's through the leadership, through commissioners or whoever it might be, and really asking the officials the questions. You're going to have some bad blood. You're going to have officials who think they should be advancing further than they are, but there are also some that really have some legitimate concerns about how they're getting games and by whom. And so we're looking at post-game surveys for all officials and their treatment. So it has to be quick. We're also looking at a post-season survey of officials about their experience with their coordinators and just being really honest. And then we're looking at a post-career survey about why people are getting out. So it's, again, the rubber hits the road for me anyway, about how they're getting games and by whom, and what the standards are for those people.
And making sure your assigners are trained. Because in many local associations, it's just whoever got the short straw. Or the person who, they're volunteering their time just because no one else wants to do it in a lot of cases. But how do we train those assigners to do a good job? Because in many cases they aren't trained. So having something where not only are they trained, but also where there's some accountability for those assigners. And I know it's hard based on the structure, but you've got to have something that's a check and balance for those assigners. The ones that are gouging officials with fees, those kinds of things, those are real problems that you've got to address from an administrative level, because those will drive out existing officials. And then when the new officials catch wind of what's going on, they're not going to want to join that party anymore either. So we've really got to make sure we're looking at who we have in place and how to address them when they're failing to meet the marks that we've established. All right, well with that, thank you so much to our panel. Great job, guys.